Picture this: flames that water couldn't extinguish, towering machines that built cathedrals, and secret formulas so powerful they were erased from history. These weren't myths or fantasies. They were real inventions of the medieval world, breakthroughs so advanced they could have reshaped society if they hadn't been deliberately abandoned. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 26 medieval inventions that vanished by choice, uncovering the hidden stories of ingenuity, fear, and the unpredictable twists of progress. This isn't just a tale of forgotten gadgets. It's a window into the minds of people who held the future in their hands and chose to let it slip away. Think about the last time you used something revolutionary, maybe a smartphone, a medical breakthrough, or even something as simple as a light bulb. Now imagine if that invention had been buried, its secrets lost because someone decided the world wasn't ready for it. That's exactly what happened time and again in the Middle Ages, a period often misunderstood as a dark age of stagnation. In truth, it was an era of dazzling creativity, where inventors pushed boundaries only to see their work erased by politics, superstition, or sheer fear of change. From Byzantine emperors guarding weapons of unimaginable power to guilds suppressing technologies that threatened their livelihoods, the reasons behind these abandonments are as fascinating as the inventions themselves. So why does this matter to us today? Because history isn't just about the past, it's a mirror. Every time a society chooses to forget an innovation, it reveals something profound about human nature, our capacity for both brilliance and hesitation, for progress and self-sabotage. As we journey through these 26 lost marvels, each one a puzzle piece in the grand story of the medieval world, you'll discover how a single decision to abandon an idea can echo across centuries. Some of these inventions might have changed the course of history, others were perhaps too dangerous to survive, but all of them hold lessons for our own era, where the pace of innovation forces us to ask, what are we willing to embrace, and what might we one day regret leaving behind? Strap in, this is history like you've never heard it before. The medieval period often gets dismissed as a stagnant pause between ancient brilliance and modern progress, but nothing could be further from the truth. Picture bustling workshops where craftsmen tinkered with gears and levers, monasteries preserving advanced mathematics, and battlefields where experimental weapons changed the rules of warfare. This was an era of relentless problem-solving where shortages of labor, threats of invasion, and the demands of growing cities pushed people to invent solutions that were nothing short of revolutionary. Take agriculture, for example. Faced with the challenge of feeding expanding populations, medieval farmers didn't just work harder, they worked smarter. They redesigned plows to cut deeper into tough soil, experimented with crop rotation systems that doubled yields, and even developed early seed drills that planted grain with precision. These weren't crude prototypes, they were carefully engineered responses to real-world problems. Similarly, in urban centers, artisans constructed towering cranes to build cathedrals that still defy modern engineering logic, while alchemists and physicians compiled encyclopedias of medical knowledge that mixed practical remedies with groundbreaking observations about the human body. Yet for all this ingenuity, history is littered with medieval innovations that vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. Some were casualties of circumstance, like the water-powered bellows that disappeared when iron-smelting regions ran out of timber. Others fell victim to deliberate suppression, such as the monastic herbal remedies outlawed during witch panics. Perhaps most fascinating are the technologies abandoned out of sheer caution, like Byzantium's closely guarded Greek fire, a weapon so devastating its creators chose to let the knowledge die rather than risk it falling into enemy hands. What unites these stories is a recurring tension between progress and preservation. Medieval societies weren't just inventing, they were constantly making judgment calls about which innovations served the common good and which threatened the fragile balance of their world. Guilds might reject labor-saving devices to protect jobs, while kings suppressed military technologies that could empower rebels. Even the church played a role, sometimes preserving knowledge in scriptoriums, other times condemning ideas that challenged doctrine. This complex interplay of creativity and caution makes the medieval approach to technology surprisingly relatable. Like us, they grappled with questions about whether new inventions would create more problems than they solved, whether traditional ways might sometimes be wiser than disruptive change. Their choices to embrace, modify, or abandon technologies echo debates we're still having today about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and other modern innovations. By understanding why these medieval inventions disappeared, we're not just uncovering lost history, we're holding up a mirror to our own relationship with progress. Few weapons in history have inspired as much awe and mystery as Greek fire, the Byzantine Empire's closely guarded secret that dominated medieval naval warfare. Picture this: enemy ships approaching Constantinople's mighty walls, only to be met with jets of liquid flame that clung to wood and sails, burning even on water. The terror it struck in adversaries wasn't just psychological, it changed the course of battles, saving the Byzantine capital from sieges multiple times during the 7th and 8th centuries. What made this weapon so revolutionary wasn't just its destructive power, but how it defied conventional methods of defense. Unlike ordinary fire, witnesses reported that throwing water on Greek fire only made the flames spread further, suggesting it contained substances that reacted violently with moisture. Historians and chemists have spent centuries trying to reconstruct its formula, with theories ranging from distilled petroleum mixed with resin to more exotic ingredients like quicklime or sulfur. The Byzantines called it liquid fire or sea fire, and its deployment was almost theatrical, siphoned through pressurized bronze tubes mounted on ships, creating what some described as a dragon's breath of flame. The secrecy surrounding its production was extreme. Only a handful of artisans and the imperial family knew the full recipe, with legends suggesting that Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitos ordered all written records destroyed to prevent rivals from replicating it. Even the name Greek fire comes from later Western European accounts. The Byzantines themselves never used that term, adding another layer of mystery. What's fascinating isn't just the technology itself, but why it was allowed to disappear. In an era where military advantage often meant survival, why would an empire willingly let such a powerful tool vanish? The answer reveals a medieval dilemma we still grapple with today: the balance between security and progress. Byzantine rulers feared that if Arab navies or European rivals acquired Greek fire, it could be turned against them with catastrophic results. Some scholars argue this wasn't just paranoia. During one naval engagement, Arab forces actually captured a Byzantine ship equipped with Greek fire mechanisms, but without the secret formula, they couldn't reproduce its effects. The Byzantines may have calculated that losing their exclusive advantage was preferable to risking widespread proliferation. The abandonment of Greek fire left a lasting gap in naval warfare technology. For centuries afterward, fleets relied on less effective incendiary weapons like fire ships or simple combustibles. Its disappearance also marked a turning point in how societies viewed technological secrecy. While trade guilds routinely guarded craft techniques, Greek fire represented perhaps the first known case of a state systematically suppressing a military innovation not just from enemies but from future generations. Modern parallels abound. Think of contemporary debates over encryption, artificial intelligence, or bioengineering. The Byzantine choice to let Greek fire die out forces us to ask, when is it justified to let knowledge disappear for the greater good? Archaeological clues and tantalizing references in medieval texts keep the search for Greek fire's formula alive today. In 2019, researchers examining Byzantine shipwrecks found residues that may contain traces of the substance, while a 10th century manual mentions a fire that burns on waves made from processed pine resin. Yet the full truth remains elusive, buried not just by time but by deliberate erasure. That intentional loss makes Greek fire more than a historical curiosity. It's a cautionary tale about how fear can shape the arc of innovation and what happens when societies choose security over shared progress. Divers exploring a sunken Roman shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901 stumbled upon what appeared to be a lump of corroded bronze. But beneath the crust of 2,000 years lay an astonishing secret, an intricate clockwork device of interlocking gears, dials, and inscriptions that would later be recognized as the world's first known analog computer. The Antikythera Mechanism, dating to around 80 BC, wasn't just ahead of its time, it was centuries ahead. This palm-sized bronze artifact could predict lunar phases, track the cycles of athletic games like the Olympics, and even forecast solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy by modeling the complex motions of the sun, moon, and planets. What makes the mechanism so extraordinary isn't just its existence, but the sheer sophistication of its engineering. Modern CT scans reveal at least 30 intermeshing bronze gears, some with teeth cut at precise angles to account for celestial irregularities. One gear even simulated the moon's elliptical orbit, a concept not mathematically formalized until Kepler in the 17th century. The device essentially functioned as a portable cosmos, allowing users to turn a hand crank and watch celestial events unfold on dials marked with ancient Greek zodiac signs and Egyptian calendar days. Yet despite its brilliance, the technology behind the Antikythera Mechanism vanished from history for over a millennium. Why would such a groundbreaking invention fail to inspire continuous development? Part of the answer lies in its very sophistication. The mechanism required specialized knowledge in astronomy, metallurgy, and precision gear-cutting skills concentrated among a small group of craftsmen likely tied to elite academic circles. When those networks fractured due to war, political upheaval, or simply the decline of patronage, the knowledge dissipated like smoke. Unlike practical technologies like water mills or plows that served immediate daily needs, the mechanism's value was more abstract, making it vulnerable to being deemed non-essential during turbulent times. Another factor was cost. The labor and materials needed to produce these devices would have made them prohibitively expensive for all but the wealthiest scholars or temples. Without mass production or broader applications, the mechanism remained a curiosity rather than a transformative tool. Later medieval inventors working with similar concepts, like the geared astrolabes of the Islamic world or the astronomical clocks of Europe, essentially had to reinvent the wheel, unaware that ancient Greeks had already solved many of the mechanical challenges they faced. The story of the Antikythera Mechanism carries an eerie resonance in our own era of rapid technological advancement. It reminds us that progress isn't inevitable, that even the most brilliant innovations can vanish if the ecosystems supporting them collapse. Today, we take for granted that each generation builds upon the last's knowledge, but history shows this chain is more fragile than it appears. When the Library of Alexandria burned or when Mayan astronomers' texts were destroyed, entire branches of understanding were severed. The mechanism's rediscovery in the 20th century sparked wonder precisely because it shattered our assumptions about ancient technological capabilities, proving that sometimes the past was far more advanced than we imagined. Perhaps most poignant is what the mechanism reveals about humanity's enduring quest to understand the cosmos. The same impulse that led ancient Greeks to craft bronze gears to model the heavens drives modern scientists to build supercomputers simulating galaxy formation. In that sense, the Antikythera mechanism wasn't truly abandoned. Its spirit lived on wherever humans sought to decode the universe's rhythms, even if its physical form was lost to time. Walk through any medieval city, and you'd likely hear craftsmen puzzling over a frustrating mystery. How had the ancient Romans built structures that stood flawless after centuries, while their own walls crumbled after mere decades? The answer lay buried in a forgotten formula: Roman concrete, a material so resilient it defied time, weather, and even earthquakes. Modern engineers still marvel at how structures like the Pantheon's dome, poured in the 2nd century, remain intact without a single crack, while medieval cathedrals required constant repairs. The secret wasn't lost for lack of trying. Medieval builders experimented tirelessly, mixing lime, sand, and water, but their concrete never matched the Romans' indestructible blend. Recent breakthroughs have uncovered part of the mystery. Scientists analyzing Roman harbor walls discovered tiny, glittering crystals of aluminous tobamorite, a mineral that forms when volcanic ash reacts with seawater over time. This wasn't just a lucky accident. The Romans deliberately shipped volcanic sand from Pozzuoli to construction sites across their empire. The ash's unique chemistry created a self-healing concrete. When cracks formed, exposure to moisture triggered new mineral growth, sealing gaps automatically. Yet this knowledge vanished after Rome's fall, possibly because the recipe was guarded by specialized guilds whose members scattered during invasions or political collapse. There's another, more provocative theory. Some historians suggest medieval authorities had incentives to let the formula stay lost. Imagine being a king whose engineers couldn't replicate the grandeur of imperial Rome. What better way to legitimize your rule than to frame those ruins as unrepeatable marvels, their perfection proof of a lost golden age? By the 12th century, crumbling Roman aqueducts and roads were called giants' work, their construction attributed to mythical beings rather than human ingenuity. This myth-making may have subtly discouraged serious attempts to rediscover the concrete recipe, as it suited powerful institutions to keep ancient Rome's achievements shrouded in mystique. The consequences of this loss were profound. Without durable concrete, medieval builders turned to stone and brick, limiting architectural possibilities. Cities spent fortunes maintaining infrastructure that Romans would have considered rudimentary. Even more striking is what this tells us about how technology backslides. Unlike Greek fire, abandoned for security reasons, Roman concrete disappeared through a slower, more insidious process, not deliberate destruction, but the gradual erosion of shared knowledge. Artisans who understood the mix of volcanic ash and lime died without passing on their craft. Records molded in neglected libraries, and practical skills gave way to legend. Today, as scientists race to recreate Roman concrete for modern seawalls that could resist rising oceans, its story feels eerily relevant. In an age where digital data can vanish with a server crash or a forgotten password, we're confronting the same vulnerabilities that doomed medieval builders to reinvent what their ancestors had mastered. The Pantheon still stands not just as a monument to Roman brilliance, but as a silent rebuke, a reminder that progress isn't a one-way street, and that even the most transformative technologies can crumble into obscurity if we fail to tend the fires of knowledge. Imagine strolling through a medieval town square when suddenly the air fills with music, but there's no musician in sight. Instead, towering above you is a windmill with pipes protruding from its base, its sails turning in the breeze to power an enormous mechanical organ. These windmill-powered organs were marvels of their age, blending art and engineering in ways that captivated entire communities. Built primarily between the 12th and 14th centuries, they transformed natural energy into public entertainment, playing preset tunes through intricate systems of bellows, gears, and wooden pins that acted like a primitive musical computer. Towns took pride in these installations, which often became local landmarks until they vanished, victims of changing tastes, practical challenges, and even moral panic. The technology behind these organs was surprisingly advanced. Craftsmen designed them to harness the wind's power not just for grinding grain, but to pump air through pipes with enough force to mimic a human player. Some models even allowed for song selection by adjusting the arrangement of pins on a rotating cylinder, a precursor to the programmable music boxes of later centuries. Records from Bruges describe an organ so elaborate it could play multiple harmonies, its sound carrying across the city to mark the hours or celebrate festivals. Yet for all their ingenuity, these instruments had a critical flaw. They were expensive to maintain. Leather bellows dried and cracked, wooden mechanisms warped in rain, and the constant force of turning sails put stress on delicate internal parts. Without wealthy patrons or municipal funding, many fell into disrepair, but cost wasn't the only reason these musical wonders disappeared. Church and civic authorities grew uneasy with their influence. A 15th century chronicle from Ghent complains that crowds gathered around the town's windmill organ to idleness and dance instead of attending mass or tending their trades. In an era where public order and piety were tightly controlled, autonomous music was seen as dangerously subversive, a distraction from work, a potential spark for unrest, or even, as some clerics warned, a diabolical imitation of sacred choir music. Several were dismantled by decree, their parts repurposed for more virtuous uses. The story of windmill organs mirrors modern debates about technology's role in society. Like today's concerns over algorithms shaping our attention, medieval communities grappled with whether automation enriched life or undermined human purpose. Their abandonment also reveals a paradox. Inventions that bring joy often struggle to justify their practical value. While watermills and forge bellows survived for their economic utility, music, seen as decorative rather than essential, was deemed expendable. Yet traces of these organs lingered in unexpected ways. Their pin-cylinder mechanisms inspired later developments in clock towers and player pianos, proving that even abandoned innovations can leave echoes in the technologies that follow. What makes their loss especially poignant is how close they came to enduring. Had medieval cities viewed public art as a civic necessity rather than a frivolity, or had maintenance been systematized like cathedral upkeep, windmill organs might have evolved into permanent features of urban life. Instead, they became footnotes, a reminder that progress isn't just about invention, but about the values that determine what we choose to keep. High above the construction sites of medieval Europe, workers trudged endlessly inside enormous wooden wheels, not as punishment, but as the driving force behind some of history's most spectacular buildings. The Treadwheel crane, a colossus of medieval engineering, turned human footsteps into lifting power capable of hoisting multi-ton stones hundreds of feet into the air. Picture a giant hamster wheel, often 15 feet in diameter, mounted between the skeletal timber frames of half-built cathedrals. 2 or 3 laborers would step rhythmically along its inner spokes, their weight setting the wheel in motion to wind heavy ropes around an axle, lifting blocks with precision that rivaled modern machinery. What made these cranes revolutionary wasn't just their brute strength, but their elegant efficiency. Unlike earlier methods requiring ramps or sheer manpower, treadwheel cranes could pivot to place materials exactly where masons needed them. Records from the construction of Cologne Cathedral show they lifted stones weighing over 2 tons to dizzying heights, all without pulleys or counterweights. The secret lay in their gearing systems, where a single rotation of the wheel translated to just a few inches of vertical lift, multiplying human effort through simple physics. Craftsmen even developed specialized models, some with dual wheels for heavier loads, others with braking systems to prevent disastrous slips. Yet despite their effectiveness, treadwheel cranes gradually vanished from construction sites by the late Middle Ages. While newer technologies like hoists and winches played a role, their decline also stemmed from something far more familiar: worker resistance. Stonemasons' guilds, powerful organizations that controlled building trades, viewed these machines as threats to their members' livelihoods. Manuscripts from 14th century England reveal guild statutes explicitly limiting crane use, insisting certain stones be lifted by hand, to preserve the ancient customs of the craft. In Florence, tensions erupted into outright sabotage when laborers dismantled a treadwheel crane mid-project, fearing its efficiency would reduce the need for their skills. This medieval resistance to labor-saving technology mirrors contemporary anxieties over automation. Just as textile workers smashed mechanical looms during the Industrial Revolution, or as some today warn about artificial intelligence replacing jobs, medieval guilds recognized that efficiency could come at a human cost. Their concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Accounts from Rouen Cathedral show that introducing treadwheel cranes reduced the workforce needed for lifting by nearly half. But the backlash may have also slowed architectural progress. Without these cranes, some projects adopted riskier methods. At Beauvais Cathedral, the push to build ever higher without adequate lifting technology contributed to the infamous collapse of its vaults in 1284. The treadwheel crane's legacy endures in unexpected ways. Modern construction still relies on the same basic principles of mechanical advantage, and historians credit medieval crane operators as early specialists in what we now call ergonomics. They developed stepping patterns to prevent exhaustion during grueling 12-hour shifts. Most poignantly, their story challenges the myth that pre-industrial societies blindly embraced progress. Medieval workers and guilds weighed technology's benefits against its disruptions, making choices that feel strikingly contemporary. In abandoned treadwheel cranes, we don't just see obsolete machinery, we recognize the timeless tension between innovation and the human lives it reshapes. In a quiet corner of the National Museum of Iraq sits a cluster of unassuming clay jars, each about the size of a grapefruit, that have sparked one of archaeology's most heated debates. Discovered in 1936 near Baghdad, these 2,000-year-old artifacts contain a startling secret: copper cylinders housing iron rods, all sealed with asphalt in a configuration that looks suspiciously like a primitive battery. When filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice, experiments show they could produce around 1 volt of electricity, not enough to power a light bulb, but sufficient for subtle electrochemical reactions. The implications are staggering. If these were indeed batteries, they predate Alessandro Volta's celebrated invention of the battery in 1800 by over a millennium and a half. What's even more fascinating is how these devices might have been used. The most compelling theory comes from artifacts found alongside them: gold-plated objects with plating so thin, and even that modern experts struggle to replicate it without electricity. Could medieval artisans have used these jars for electroplating, dipping jewelry or statues into a gold solution while running a current to bond the metal? Persian texts from the same era describe mystical vessels that could transfer colors and properties between metals, which some scholars now interpret as coded references to electrochemical processes. The Baghdad batteries may represent a lost branch of materials science, where chemistry and metallurgy intersected in ways we're only beginning to decipher. Yet by the High Middle Ages, knowledge of these devices had faded into obscurity. Why would such a groundbreaking technology disappear? Part of the answer may lie in cultural attitudes toward the unseen forces they harnessed. Islamic scholars of the period made groundbreaking advances in optics, medicine, and astronomy, but electricity occupied an ambiguous space. Some theologians viewed its effects as borderline sorcery, especially when used to create false gold through plating. A 9th century text from the House of Wisdom in Baghdad warns against the unnatural marriage of metals, suggesting religious reservations may have discouraged further experimentation. There's also the possibility that the batteries were victims of their own specialization. Unlike water wheels or windmills, which had obvious agricultural applications, these devices served niche artistic or scientific purposes. As political upheavals disrupted trade networks and workshop traditions, the knowledge to maintain them might have evaporated within a few generations. It's a pattern we've seen before when technologies rely on tightly held expertise rather than widespread understanding. They're vulnerable to being lost in the chaos of history. The Baghdad batteries challenge our assumptions about the timeline of invention. They suggest that breakthroughs we consider modern might have had ancient precursors, only to vanish and be rediscovered centuries later. In their quiet way, these clay jars ask us to reconsider what progress really means, and how many other marvels might lie buried in the archaeological record, waiting for us to recognize them for what they truly were. Standing nearly 40 feet tall in the ancient Chinese capital of Kaifeng, Su Song's clock tower was more than a timekeeping device. It was a mechanical universe in miniature. Built in 1094 during the Song dynasty, this towering marvel didn't just mark the hours, it mapped the movements of celestial bodies with astonishing precision. Powered by a water wheel escapement, a breakthrough that wouldn't appear in Europe for another 200 years, the clock's intricate system of gears and weights drove rotating armillary spheres that tracked stars, displayed planetary positions, and even sounded automated bells and drums to announce each passing hour. At its heart was what historians now recognize as the world's first known endless power transmitting chain drive, a concept essential to everything from bicycles to industrial machinery. What made Su Song's invention truly revolutionary was its accuracy. While European clocks of the era might lose or gain half an hour daily, Song dynasty officials used this hydraulic wonder to calibrate calendars and coordinate imperial ceremonies with unprecedented consistency. The tower's bronze celestial globe alone contained over 1,400 individual stars plotted according to contemporary astronomical observations. Yet despite its sophistication, this mechanical masterpiece stood for only a few decades before falling into disuse. When invading Jurchen forces sacked Kaifeng in 1127, the clock tower was dismantled, not by conquerors but by fleeing Song engineers who hoped to rebuild it elsewhere. That reconstruction never happened. The story behind its abandonment reveals how even the most advanced technologies depend on fragile ecosystems of support. Su Song himself was a polymath, an astronomer, cartographer, and statesman whose position gave him access to imperial workshops and funding. After his death, no single patron or institution carried forward his vision. Later Ming Dynasty scholars dismissed hydraulic clocks as frivolous curiosities, preferring celestial observation methods they deemed more philosophically pure. Meanwhile, political upheavals scattered the specialized craftsmen who understood the tower's complex gearing systems. Unlike Europe's cathedral clocks, which became civic symbols maintained by generations of monks and smiths, Song's invention lacked this cultural anchoring. There's a profound irony in how this loss played out. While medieval Europe gradually refined mechanical clocks, often inspired by vague reports of Chinese wonders, the original technology languished. By the time Jesuit missionaries brought European clock designs back to China in the 16th century, locals viewed them as exotic novelties, unaware their ancestors had pioneered similar mechanisms centuries earlier. This reversal underscores a sobering truth. Technological leadership isn't permanent. A society at the cutting edge in one era can become a bystander in the next if it fails to institutionalize and transmit its innovations. The ghost of Song's clock tower haunts modern discussions about sustaining progress. Like contemporary concerns over losing semiconductor expertise or spaceflight capabilities, its disappearance warns how easily specialized knowledge can evaporate without continuous practice and teaching. Yet fragments of its legacy endure. The same chain drive principle appears in Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, likely inspired by Silk Road travelers' accounts, and forms the basis of modern machinery. In that sense, the tower wasn't wholly abandoned. Its ideas simply went dormant, waiting for new minds to rediscover them across the gulf of centuries. Legend claims Viking ships crossed the North Atlantic through fog so thick a man couldn't see his own outstretched hand, guided only by a glowing crystal held to the sky. This wasn't magic but sophisticated polarimetry. The so-called Sunstone, likely a piece of transparent calcite or Iceland spar, worked by revealing the sun's position even through overcast skies. When light passes through this crystal, it splits into two beams due to a property called birefringence. By rotating the stone until both beams matched in brightness, navigators could pinpoint the sun's location with uncanny accuracy, sometimes within 5 degrees of its true position. Modern experiments prove the technique works. A 2013 study had volunteers using replica sunstones to navigate cloudy waters with nearly the same precision as GPS. What makes the Sunstones' disappearance so puzzling is how perfectly it fit Viking needs. Unlike Mediterranean sailors who hugged coastlines, Norse explorers ventured into the open ocean where landmarks vanished and magnetic compasses behaved erratically near the poles. A mineral that functioned in any weather was revolutionary, yet by the 14th century, sunstones vanished from nautical records just as European ships adopted compasses en masse. The reasons behind this abandonment reveal a clash between practicality and prestige. While compasses offered year-round reliability, they lacked the sunstone's elegance in polar regions where magnetic fields dip steeply. Some scholars argue Norse captains deliberately phased out sunstones to protect their reputation as peerless navigators. Sagas are filled with boasts about sailing by sun, stars, and wave patterns, never mentioning the crystal that actually made such feats possible. There's another layer to this technological transition. Compasses represented a shift from skill-based to tool-based navigation. Mastering a sunstone required years of training to interpret subtle light patterns, while anyone could follow a magnetized needle. As maritime trade expanded, the demand for quickly trained crews may have outweighed the benefits of maintaining specialized sunstone navigators. The Vikings' famous secrecy played a role too. Their reluctance to document techniques ensured sunstone knowledge died with its last practitioners. Today, the Sunstone's legacy lives on in unexpected places. Modern pilots learn polarized light navigation as an emergency skill, while archaeologists have found calcite crystals aboard several Viking shipwrecks. Its story challenges our assumptions about technological progress. Sometimes, advanced doesn't mean better, just more convenient. In abandoning the Sunstone, sailors traded a nuanced understanding of nature's cues for the simplicity of pointing north, gaining reliability at the cost of a deeper connection to the elements they once read like a map. Picture a medieval battlefield where warriors wielded what looked like bamboo spears until they erupted in gouts of flame and flying shrapnel. This was the fire lance, China's terrifying answer to close-quarters combat during the 10th century. More flamethrower than firearm, these early gunpowder weapons consisted of hollow bamboo tubes packed with a primitive gunpowder mixture, sometimes loaded with broken pottery or metal scraps. When ignited, they could project flames up to 10 feet while spraying deadly fragments, a psychological and physical nightmare for opponents. Historical texts describe their use during sieges, where defenders mounted fire lances on city walls to repel climbing enemies with what one chronicler called the breath of fire dragons. What makes the fire lance's abandonment so intriguing is that it wasn't due to ineffectiveness. Contemporary accounts from the Song dynasty record these weapons successfully clearing enemy trenches and disrupting cavalry charges. The problem lay in their very nature as transitional technology. Bamboo, while lightweight and easy to produce, couldn't withstand repeated use. Tubes split or burned through after just a few shots, and the gunpowder mixtures of the era varied wildly in quality, sometimes fizzling weakly, other times exploding prematurely. As metalworking advanced, craftsmen began experimenting with iron barrels that could handle more powerful charges reliably. By the 13th century, the earliest true hand cannons began eclipsing their bamboo predecessors. Yet there's another, often overlooked reason for the fire lance's disappearance: battlefield evolution. As armor improved, the scattered fragments from bamboo weapons became less effective compared to concentrated metal projectiles. Military strategists also grew wary of their unpredictability. Unlike arrows or spears that followed predictable trajectories, fire lances could accidentally ignite nearby supplies or even their own users. A Ming Dynasty military manual explicitly warns against their use in dense formations after several recorded incidents of friendly fire. The transition from fire lances to metal-barreled firearms mirrors countless technological crossroads in military history, where an invention's success sows the seeds of its own obsolescence. What began as a simple tube of flame evolved into the arquebus and eventually the modern rifle, each iteration rendering its ancestors obsolete. But the fire lance's legacy endures in unexpected ways. Its basic principle, using confined explosions to propel damage, remains the foundation of all firearms, a testament to how even abandoned technologies can shape the future in ways their inventors never imagined. Deep in the forests of medieval Europe, blacksmiths harnessed rushing rivers to power an innovation that revolutionized metalworking: the water-powered bellows. Picture a workshop where a water wheel's relentless turning pumps massive leather bellows, forcing air into a furnace with such intensity that temperatures soar high enough to liquefy iron. This wasn't just an upgrade from hand-pumped bellows. It was a leap toward industrialization, enabling furnaces to operate continuously and produce higher quality metal in quantities previously unimaginable. By the 12th century, these systems were the backbone of Europe's iron industry, fueling everything from plowshares to swords with unprecedented efficiency. Yet this early promise of industrial-scale production faced an unexpected obstacle: success itself. As demand for iron grew, forests vanished at alarming rates to feed the furnace's insatiable appetite for charcoal. In some regions, like the Harz Mountains of Germany, entire landscapes were stripped bare, forcing smelters to transport wood from ever greater distances. By the 14th century, the cost of fuel began outpacing the profits from iron, creating a vicious cycle where the very technology designed to boost production made it increasingly unsustainable. Compounding the problem, shifting trade routes flooded markets with cheaper iron from regions where timber was still plentiful, undercutting local producers who relied on water-powered bellows. The decline of these bellows reveals a harsh truth about technological progress. It never exists in a vacuum. A brilliant invention can falter when external factors like resource depletion or global trade shift the ground beneath it. Some historians argue that this early industrial bottleneck delayed Europe's metallurgical advancement by centuries. Without reliable access to high-quality iron, innovations like precision gears or reinforced steel structures remained out of reach until coal-fired furnaces emerged much later. But the story doesn't end there. In China, where water-powered bellows appeared even earlier, a different fate unfolded. Treatises from the Song dynasty describe elaborate systems linking multiple bellows to single water wheels, creating furnaces capable of casting monumental iron statues. Yet here too, the technology faded, not from deforestation but from imperial edicts. Fearing that concentrated metal production could empower rebellions, Ming dynasty rulers dismantled large-scale ironworks, scattering artisans and abandoning techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Industrial Revolution. The water-powered bellows legacy lingers in modern debates about sustainable industry. Like medieval blacksmiths grappling with deforestation, today's green energy pioneers face similar trade-offs: how to balance scale with environmental limits. These forgotten machines remind us that innovation isn't just about brilliance. It's about adaptability, foresight, and sometimes learning the hard way that progress must work with the world's constraints, not against them. For centuries across medieval Europe, oxen lumbered through fields with heavy wooden yokes pressing against their throats, a design so inefficient it limited their pulling power and often left the animals gasping for breath. Then came a simple yet transformative innovation: the padded horse collar. Unlike the throat-crushing yoke, this leather and stuffed fabric harness distributed weight across a horse's shoulders and chest, allowing it to pull plows with nearly twice the force of an ox while working longer hours. Manuscript illustrations from the 9th century show the dramatic shift: teams of horses now moving freely, their heads lifted high as they dragged iron-tipped plows through stubborn soil. The impact was revolutionary. Farms that adopted horse collars could cultivate more land in less time, leading to surplus crops, expanded trade, and even population growth in regions like northern France and England, where heavy clay soils had previously resisted efficient farming. Yet by the late Middle Ages, something curious happened. In parts of Germany, Scandinavia, and even England, where horse collars had once flourished, farmers began returning to oxen. Archaeological digs reveal stable remains where horse gear gradually disappears, replaced by older oxen yokes. Why abandon a technology that so clearly boosted productivity? The answers reveal how culture and circumstance often override pure efficiency. In some areas, wars and disease had decimated horse populations, making oxen, which were hardier and reproduced more slowly, the only viable option. Elsewhere, like in alpine regions, farmers found oxen's sure-footedness better suited to steep terrain. But perhaps most fascinating were the cultural factors. In parts of medieval Poland and Hungary, landowners viewed oxen as symbols of traditional values, their slow, steady pace reflecting virtues of patience and humility. Horses, by contrast, became associated with vanity, especially as nobility increasingly reserved them for riding and warfare. The horse collar's retreat wasn't uniform. Regions with dense, fertile soils where horsepower's speed mattered most, like Flanders, doubled down on the technology. But its partial abandonment serves as a cautionary tale about innovation's adoption curve. Even when a technology proves objectively superior, Its success depends on a fragile web of infrastructure, resources, and cultural buy-in. Modern parallels abound. Think of how electric cars struggled for decades despite their advantages, held back by everything from oil industry lobbying to consumer habits shaped by gasoline's convenience. The medieval farmer switching back to oxen wasn't being irrational. He was responding to a world where the best tool depended on more than just raw efficiency. What makes the horse collar's story so compelling is its reminder that progress rarely moves in straight lines. For every society racing forward with new technologies, there's another pausing, adapting, or even stepping back, not from ignorance, but because survival often means balancing innovation with the realities of an unpredictable world. The padded harness itself never disappeared entirely. It evolved into forms still used today in working horse communities, but its medieval ebb and flow challenge our assumptions about why technologies succeed or fail, and who gets to decide what progress really means. At the height of the medieval world, no tool bridged earth and sky more elegantly than the astrolabe, a handheld brass universe that fit in a scholar's palm. This intricate device, often called the mathematician's jewel, allowed navigators to measure the sun's height above the horizon, determine latitude, and even calculate prayer times based on celestial positions. Islamic astronomers perfected its design during the 9th century, engraving delicate coordinate grids and rotating plates that modeled the heavens with breathtaking precision. A skilled user could hold the astrolabe aloft, align its sighting rule with a star, and read altitude measurements accurate to within half a degree, a feat that made it indispensable aboard ships crossing the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean. Yet by the 17th century, these once prized instruments began gathering dust in royal cabinets and monastery storerooms. The astrolabe's decline wasn't due to any single failure, but to a cascade of technological shifts that exposed its limitations. The magnetic compass, though less precise for latitude, offered continuous orientation without requiring clear skies. The cross staff and later the sextant provided more streamlined ways to measure celestial angles, especially on rocking ship decks where balancing an astrolabe's swinging parts proved maddening. Most critically, mechanical clocks began solving the longitude problem that had stumped astrolabe users for centuries. Where medieval navigators needed complex calculations to estimate east-west position, a reliable marine chronometer could simply compare local time to a home port's time, no star sightings required. What sealed the astrolabe's fate, however, was its very sophistication. Mastering its nested disks and rotating retar required years of training in spherical astronomy knowledge concentrated among elite scholars and navigators. As global trade expanded, ship captains demanded tools their entire crews could operate with minimal instruction. A 1254 Arabic manual lists over 1,000 uses for the astrolabe, from predicting eclipses to surveying land. But this versatility became a liability in an era craving specialized simplicity. The irony is that the astrolabe's principles never truly disappeared. Its stereographic projection, the method of mapping a sphere onto a flat surface, became foundational for modern cartography. Renaissance astronomers adapted its components into the volvel, a paper version used for calculating planetary positions. Even today, pilots learning celestial navigation encounter the astrolabe's spiritual descendant, the bubble sextant, which measures star angles through a liquid stabilized prism. This transition from universal tool to historical curiosity holds a sobering lesson about technological evolution. The astrolabe didn't fail. The world around it changed in ways that made its brilliance suddenly seem cumbersome. In our own age of rapidly obsolescing gadgets, its story feels uncomfortably familiar, a reminder that even the most elegant solutions are temporary waypoints in humanity's endless quest to master its tools. Beneath the scorching sun of the Sahara, the city of Timbuktu once glittered as a beacon of learning, its libraries overflowing with manuscripts that captured the brilliance of medieval Africa. Scholars from across the Islamic world traveled there to study astronomy texts predicting eclipses to the hour, medical treatises detailing surgical procedures unheard of in Europe, and legal documents showcasing a judicial system that rivaled any on the continent. These weren't primitive scrolls, but bound volumes filled with meticulous calligraphy and vibrant illustrations, some on paper imported from as far as Venice, others on locally produced parchment made from goat and sheepskin. The collection was staggering, over 700,000 works at its peak, covering everything from advanced algebra to treatises on human rights, written 3 centuries before the Magna Carta. Yet today, many of these treasures exist only as fragments, their pages scattered across museums and private collections worldwide. The story of their disappearance isn't one of natural decay, but of deliberate erasure. When the Songhai Empire fell to Moroccan invaders in 1591, the first targets weren't gold or territory, they were libraries. Manuscripts were burned as symbols of pagan knowledge, while others were looted and sold to fund military campaigns. Centuries later, French colonial administrators completed what invaders had started, shipping entire collections to Europe as curiosities, or simply leaving them to rot in abandoned storerooms. A 19th-century French officer's diary chillingly describes using manuscripts as kindling, joking that the barbarian writings at least made good firewood. But the greatest tragedy wasn't violent destruction, it was neglect. In the 20th century, families who'd safeguarded manuscripts for generations found themselves pressured to sell them to survive droughts and economic hardship. Others hid their ancestral libraries in crawl spaces and buried clay jars, afraid colonial authorities would confiscate them. The result was a slow-motion cultural hemorrhage, as centuries of accumulated knowledge seeped away one manuscript at a time. Modern preservationists working in Timbuktu recount heartbreaking stories of rescuing texts from market stalls where they'd been repurposed as wrapping paper or stuffed into shoes as makeshift insoles. What makes this loss so profound is how narrowly we avoided total oblivion. In 2012, as jihadist groups occupied northern Mali and began torching libraries, local archivists executed a daring rescue, smuggling over 300,000 manuscripts to safety in donkey carts and fishing boats, often under cover of darkness. Their heroism preserved a fragment of Timbuktu's legacy, but the vast majority of works remain lost or fragmented. The libraries of Timbuktu stand as a warning about the fragility of human knowledge. Unlike technologies abandoned for being obsolete, these manuscripts were actively suppressed because of what they represented, proof that medieval Africa was anything but the dark continent colonial narratives claimed. Their erasure reshaped global perceptions for centuries, leaving a void that Western scholars filled with myths of civilizational superiority. Today, as researchers painstakingly digitize surviving pages, we're only beginning to grasp how much was stolen, not just from Mali, but from humanity's shared understanding of our intellectual past. For centuries, European scribes labored over animal skins, scraping, stretching, and polishing parchment to create surfaces for their quills. The arrival of paper from the Islamic world in the 12th century should have sparked an immediate revolution. Here was a material far cheaper than parchment, requiring no livestock herds to produce, and capable of being made in consistent sizes perfect for bound books. Arab traders had perfected paper-making techniques learned from Chinese prisoners centuries earlier, using pulped linen and hemp fibers to create smooth, durable sheets. Yet when this technological marvel reached Christian Europe, something unexpected happened. It stalled. the resistance came from an unlikely source, the powerful parchment guilds. These craftsmen, who controlled the production of writing materials from their workshops near monasteries and royal courts, saw paper as an existential threat. Records from 13th century Spain reveal guilds lobbying bishops to ban paper for religious texts, claiming it was unworthy of sacred words compared to pure animal parchment. In France, parchment makers spread rumors that paper would crumble to dust within decades, a myth that persisted even as centuries-old Islamic manuscripts proved otherwise. Some guilds went further, securing royal decrees that mandated parchment for legal documents, ensuring their trade's survival through bureaucratic inertia. What's fascinating is how paper's advantages became obstacles to its adoption. Unlike parchment, which required scarce animal hides and skilled artisans, paper could be made by nearly anyone with rags and a vat. This very accessibility terrified established producers. A 15th century Florentine merchant's diary complains that paper makers undercut honest men's livelihoods by selling books at prices even students could afford. The church, too, was ambivalent. While cheaper books meant more Bibles in circulation, it also meant more unauthorized text slipping past clerical censors. The turning point came from an unexpected quarter, bureaucracy. As medieval governments expanded, the sheer volume of tax records, contracts, and correspondence overwhelmed parchment supplies. Kings realized they could either bankrupt themselves buying animal skins or embrace paper's practicality. By the 14th century, even conservative institutions like the English Exchequer were keeping duplicate records, one on traditional parchment for show, another on paper for actual use. The final blow came with Gutenberg's press in the 1450s, when the economics of mass printing made paper's adoption inevitable. This delayed revolution holds mirror to modern technological transitions. Like medieval parchment guilds, today's industries often resist disruptive innovations. Think of taxi companies fighting ride-sharing apps or record labels clinging to physical albums as digital music soared. Paper's slow spread reminds us that progress isn't just about invention. It's about overcoming the human systems that cling to the familiar, even when the future is literally at their doorstep. Across the windswept plains of medieval Persia and China, an unusual silhouette once dotted the landscape: tall cylindrical towers crowned with vertical sails that spun like giant whisks. These were the earliest vertical axis windmills, a design so efficient that some could grind grain in winds as light as 5 miles per hour. Unlike their horizontal cousins that needed constant adjustment to face changing winds, these mills captured breezes from any direction thanks to their vertically mounted sails. Persian engineers as early as the 7th century perfected models with woven reed sails that twisted as they rotated, creating aerodynamic lift similar to modern turbine blades. Chinese records describe even more sophisticated versions: multi-story structures where the central vertical shaft powered not just millstones but also water pumps and textile machinery through elaborate gear systems. Yet by the 14th century, these ingenious machines began vanishing from the regions that invented them, replaced almost entirely by horizontal windmills with their iconic 4-bladed designs. The reasons behind this shift reveal how cultural and economic factors can override pure functionality. In Persia, some historians point to the rise of powerful milling guilds who saw the vertical design simplicity as a threat. Any farmer could build one without specialized carpentry skills, undermining the guild's control over grain processing. A 15th century trade ledger from Isfahan shows guilds charging triple fees for maintaining horizontal mills while refusing service to vertical mill owners altogether. Meanwhile, in China, the story took a different turn. The same vertical mills that once powered entire villages fell victim to shifting imperial priorities. When Mongol rulers consolidated power in the 13th century, they favored large-scale water mills over wind power for grain processing, seeing them as easier to tax and control. A surviving decree from Kublai Khan's administration orders the dismantling of windmills near major rivers to prevent disorderly competition with state-run milling operations. Without institutional support, knowledge of crafting the precise curved sails needed for vertical mills gradually faded, preserved only in obscure technical manuals that later scholars dismissed as folklore. What makes this abandonment particularly striking is that vertical windmills weren't inferior technology, they were simply different. Modern wind tunnel tests show their vertical design actually outperforms horizontal blades in turbulent or variable winds, the exact conditions found in many medieval towns nestled between hills or forests. Their disappearance speaks to how technologies don't always advance in straight lines. Sometimes the best solution loses out to political convenience, entrenched interests, or simple historical accidents. The legacy of these forgotten mills lives on in unexpected places. 20th century engineers rediscovered their principles when designing urban wind turbines that work amid skyscrapers' chaotic airflow. And in remote pockets of Afghanistan and Portugal, descendants of medieval vertical mills still turn today quiet testimony to an alternative path wind power might have taken if history had blown in a different direction. In the armories of medieval sultans and crusader kings, one weapon inspired more awe than any other, the Damascus steel sword. Blades forged from this mysterious metal could reportedly slice through lesser swords like butter, bend 90 degrees without breaking, and hold edges so sharp they could cut a floating silk scarf in half. European knights encountering them during the Crusades described them as devil's hooves for their distinctive wavy surface patterns, while Islamic scholars wrote of swordsmiths quenching red-hot blades by plunging them into the bodies of slaves, believing human proteins enhanced the steel's strength. Modern metallurgists analyzing surviving examples have found carbon nanotube structures within the metal, a microscopic feat of engineering that shouldn't have been possible with medieval technology. The secret behind Damascus steel's superiority lay in its complex forging process. Unlike European swords made from uniform iron, these blades started as small cakes of wootz steel imported from India, a high-carbon alloy containing trace elements like vanadium and tungsten. Smiths would heat and hammer these ingots in precise cycles, folding the metal hundreds of times while carefully controlling temperatures to create layered microstructures. The final step involved an enigmatic quenching technique, possibly using fast-cooling mediums like urine or pomegranate juice that triggered unique crystalline formations. What resulted wasn't just a weapon, but a work of physics-defying art, strong yet flexible, with those iconic rippling patterns revealing the molecular dance of iron and carbon frozen in metal. Yet by the 18th century, the last masters of this craft had died without passing on their knowledge. The disappearance of Damascus steel remains one of history's great technological whodunits, with competing theories each offering tantalizing clues. One school points to exhausted mines. The specific Indian ores containing those critical trace elements may have been depleted after centuries of extraction. Others blame the collapse of trade routes, as political chaos disrupted wootz steel shipments to Syrian forges. Smiths may have attempted substitutions that never quite replicated the original magic. But perhaps the most compelling theory involves the guild system itself. Damascus steel wasn't just a product, it was a ritual. Apprentices spent decades learning subtle techniques guarded like state secrets, from reading the color of heated metal to timing hammer blows by chanting specific prayers. Some guilds may have deliberately allowed the art to die rather than risk its profanation. A 17th-century Persian manuscript recounts how a master smith, upon seeing his son waste steel through careless work, smashed his own furnace and tools, vowing, "Better the knowledge perish than live in unworthy hands." Modern attempts to recreate Damascus steel highlight just how much was lost. While pattern-welded blades can mimic the visual ripples, they lack the original's extraordinary material properties. Even with electron microscopes and atomic spectroscopy, today's metallurgists still debate whether they've unlocked all the secrets. The closest breakthrough came in 1981, when researchers discovered that cycling the steel between precise high and low temperatures could produce similar carbon nanostructures. But whether this matches medieval methods remains anyone's guess. The loss of Damascus steel stands as a sobering reminder of how easily expertise can vanish when tied to oral traditions and artisan intuition. Unlike the printing press or windmill, this wasn't technology that could be sketched in a notebook. It lived in the hands and instincts of masters who took their secrets to the grave. In our age of digital backups and global knowledge sharing, it's easy to forget how fragile the chain of human understanding truly is. Every time a modern bladesmith struggles to replicate those legendary swords, we're witnessing more than just metallurgy. We're seeing the ghost of a craft that refused to be passed on, challenging our assumptions about what progress really preserves. Beneath the clatter of swords and the cries of battle, medieval surgeons performed a quieter kind of craftsmanship, one that transformed shattered knights into functional warriors through artificial limbs far more advanced than history remembers. Picture a 15th-century battlefield where a nobleman, having lost his right hand to a French broadsword, doesn't resign himself to life as an invalid. Instead, he straps on a prosthetic so meticulously engineered it allows him to grip a shield, hold a quill, or even pluck the strings of a lute. These weren't crude wooden pegs or decorative hooks, but articulated devices with spring-loaded fingers, adjustable tension straps, and in some cases, intricate locking mechanisms that mimicked natural movement. A surviving example from Germany, dated 1380, features a bronze hand with individually movable digits operated by internal gears, a level of sophistication that wouldn't reappear in prosthetics until the 19th century. What makes these medieval innovations so startling is the context of their creation. Unlike modern prosthetics developed in sterile labs, these were forged in the urgency of war's aftermath. Crusader surgeons, faced with an epidemic of limb injuries from Islamic scimitar strikes, collaborated with armorers to borrow metallurgical techniques. Manuscripts from Moorish Spain describe prosthetic legs with flexible knee joints crafted by the same artisans who made articulated plate armor, while Italian records reveal wealthy merchants commissioning lifelike porcelain hands painted to match skin tone, an early nod to both function and aesthetics. The driving force wasn't just compassion, but economics. A knight with a working prosthetic could maintain his feudal obligations, while common soldiers fitted with basic grippers could return to farming or craftwork rather than becoming lifelong burdens. Yet by the 17th century, this flourishing field had regressed dramatically. Later prosthetics were often little more than cosmetic stumps, with medical texts dismissing earlier mechanical designs as vanities or unnatural contrivances. The reasons for this backslide reveal how tightly medical progress was tethered to conflict. As Europe's wars grew less frequent and more dominated by gunpowder weapons, which tended to kill rather than maim, the demand for advanced prosthetics waned. Guilds that once specialized in their construction shifted to more profitable ventures like clockmaking, while the rise of puritanical religious views discouraged defying God's will with artificial limbs. A telling example comes from England, where Parliament banned the use of prosthetic armed men in military ranks after 1650, declaring them unfit to serve, effectively crushing the market for functional designs. The loss wasn't just technological but philosophical. Medieval prosthetics reflected a worldview that saw disability as a challenge to engineer around rather than a permanent limitation. A 13th century French manual for knights explicitly states that losing a limb does not diminish honor, only the means to pursue it, a sentiment that wouldn't resurface in Western medicine until the modern rehabilitation movement. Today, as archaeologists unearth these forgotten devices, like the recently discovered Swiss prosthetic from 1420 with its intricate leather and iron finger mechanisms, we're forced to reconsider the narrative of medical progress. Sometimes the past holds solutions more humane and ingenious than we've yet managed to rediscover. Behind the high stone walls of medieval monasteries, an entirely different kind of warfare was being waged not with swords and shields, but with trowels and tinctures. Monastic herb gardens functioned as the pharmaceutical laboratories of their day, where monk physicians cultivated and tested hundreds of plants for their healing properties. Records from the famous garden at St. Gall in Switzerland list over 120 distinct medicinal species, from valerian for sleep to digitalis for heart conditions, remedies that modern science would later validate as effective. These weren't random folk cures, but carefully documented treatments compiled in illuminated manuscripts like the 11th century Physica by Hildegard of Bingen, which detailed precise dosages and preparation methods for everything from migraine relief to wound disinfection. The suppression of this knowledge didn't happen overnight. Initially, the Church actively promoted herbal medicine as an extension of God's providence, seeing plants as earthly manifestations of divine healing. But as the 14th century brought waves of plague and social upheaval, attitudes hardened. Women herbalists who had traditionally served as village healers became targets of suspicion during witch trials. A chilling 15th century inquisitor's manual lists knowledge of herbs that ease pain as evidence of diabolical activity, leading to the execution of countless midwives and healers. Simultaneously, the rise of university-trained physicians created a professional class invested in dismissing peasant remedies to bolster their own authority. A 1623 edict from the Paris medical faculty banned non-licensed practitioners from prescribing even simple chamomile tea, calling it the work of ignorant old wives. What makes this loss particularly tragic is how much was forgotten. Modern researchers poring over monastic manuscripts have been stunned by the sophistication of some treatments. A 10th century Saxon recipe for eye infections contains an antimicrobial compound similar to modern antibiotics, derived from crushed garlic and onion fermented in wine. The famous balm of Gilead, once used to prevent surgical infections, was recently found to contain myrrh and other resins with proven antiseptic properties. These weren't placebos, they were the product of centuries of observational science, now scattered by persecution and institutional gatekeeping. The story of suppressed herbal knowledge isn't just about medicine, it's about who controls the narrative of healing. When the printing press democratized medical texts in the 16th century, the first books to circulate widely weren't monastic compendiums, but the works of university physicians who dismissed plant-based treatments. By the time Linnaeus began systematically classifying plants in the 18th century, much of the practical knowledge about their medicinal uses had already been relegated to superstition. Yet fragments survived in unexpected places in the notebooks of Enlightenment botanists who quietly recorded peasant remedies, or in the traditions of marginalized communities like the Roma or Appalachian settlers, who preserved this knowledge as oral tradition. Today, as scientists rediscover the antibiotic potential of medieval wound salves or the anti-cancer properties of monastic garden plants, we're forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The so-called Dark Ages of medicine weren't dark because people lacked effective treatments. They became dark because systemic forces chose to extinguish the light of knowledge that didn't fit emerging power structures. Every time a researcher validates an ancient remedy, it's not just science catching up to history, it's history reminding us how easily we can lose what once was known. For nearly 400 years, the trebuchet reigned as the ultimate expression of medieval military engineering, a towering wooden beast capable of hurling stones heavier than a man across distances exceeding 300 yards. Picture the scene. A besieged castle's defenders watching helplessly as crews loaded massive counterweights, the groaning of ropes and timbers building to a crescendo before the throwing arm snapped upward, launching its deadly payload in a soaring arc that ended with walls crumbling like dry bread. These weren't just oversized catapults, they were precision instruments of destruction, some requiring teams of 50 men working in perfect coordination to operate. Historical accounts describe trebuchets so accurate they could bombard the same weakened Castle Merlon repeatedly until it collapsed, or even lob diseased animal carcasses over walls to spread illness among defenders, an early form of biological warfare. What makes the trebuchet's decline so fascinating is that gunpowder didn't immediately make it obsolete. When cannons first appeared on European battlefields in the 14th century, they were temperamental, dangerous, and often less effective than their mechanical predecessors. Early bombards frequently exploded, killing their own crews, while their rate of fire couldn't match a well-trained trebuchet team launching a projectile every 15 minutes. Yet armies gradually abandoned the mighty trebuchet not because cannons were better at first, but because they held the promise of becoming better. The writing was on the wall, or rather, the wall was coming down in ways no trebuchet could match. By the mid-15th century, Turkish supercannons like the famous Basilica could hurl stones weighing over half a ton, shattering Constantinople's supposedly impregnable walls that had withstood trebuchet bombardments for centuries. The trebuchet's final strongholds reveal much about how technologies cling to relevance. Scotland's Highlanders used them effectively into the 1600s during clan warfare where gunpowder was scarce, while Japanese castles maintained trebuchet crews well into the Edo period as ceremonial units. Some Spanish conquistadors even constructed makeshift trebuchets during the siege of Tenochtitlan when their cannons became waterlogged, proving old technologies could still find niche applications. But perhaps most telling was the fate of trebuchets in Malta during the Great Siege of 1565. The Knights Hospitaller, desperately short of gunpowder, rebuilt medieval siege engines from archival sketches. Though these machines scored some successes, their crews quickly abandoned them whenever captured Ottoman cannons became available, voting with their lives on which technology they trusted more. The lesson here isn't just about military obsolescence, but about how societies choose between competing technologies. Trebuchets represented the pinnacle of a mechanical tradition stretching back to Roman torsion engines, requiring master carpenters who understood wood grain and tension like modern engineers understand steel and hydraulics. Their replacement by cannons marked more than a shift in firepower. It signaled the triumph of chemistry over craftsmanship, of expendable commodities over irreplaceable artisans. Today, when we see trebuchets reconstructed at Renaissance fairs or used in physics demonstrations, we're not just looking at historical curiosities, we're witnessing the ghost of an entire lineage of engineering that once dominated warfare, only to vanish when the world found a new path forward. In the dimly lit workshops of medieval metalworkers, one technique reigned supreme for capturing breathtaking detail: the lost wax casting method. Picture an artisan carefully sculpting a lifelike figure in beeswax, every fold of cloth and curl of hair rendered with meticulous precision. This fragile masterpiece would then be encased in clay, forming a mold that was heated to drain away the wax, leaving behind a hollow cavity, ready to receive molten bronze or gold. The results were astonishing. Devotional statues with eyelashes so fine they caught the light, reliquaries with vines that seemed to tremble in an unseen breeze, and armored decorations so intricate modern jewelers struggle to replicate them. A surviving 12th century crucifix from Germany, cast using this method, reveals details as subtle as teardrops on Christ's face and individual thorns in his crown, testament to the technique's unparalleled precision. What makes the lost wax method's decline so poignant is that it wasn't replaced by superior technology, but by economic pragmatism. As medieval cities grew and demand for metal goods skyrocketed, faster production methods emerged. Sand casting, though incapable of matching lost wax's detail, allowed workshops to produce 10 simple buckles in the time it took to create one wax masterpiece. Guild records from 15th century Florence show apprentices spending years mastering wax carving only to graduate into an industry increasingly focused on mass-produced goods. A heartbreaking entry in one master's ledger notes dismissing his last wax specialist because the abbot prefers 50 plain candlesticks to one singular angel. The artistic loss was compounded by the way knowledge disappeared. Unlike carpentry or masonry where techniques could be observed and imitated, lost wax casting relied on tacit knowledge, the kind passed through generations of hands-on demonstration. When the Black Death wiped out master craftsmen in some regions, entire lineages of expertise vanished overnight. A 17th century Spanish sculptor's diary laments finding exquisite wax models in an abandoned workshop, but being unable to recreate the casting process, writing, "The secret died with old Manuel, though his wax saints still whisper of it." Yet the technique never fully disappeared. It retreated into specialized niches where detail outweighed cost. Bell founders continued using modified lost wax methods to create precisely tuned clappers, while goldsmiths employed it for royal signet rings where forgery-proof intricacy justified the expense. Today, as conservators struggle to repair medieval masterpieces without their original techniques, we're reminded that economic efficiency often comes at an invisible cultural cost, the slow erosion of craftsmanship that can't be measured in coins or labor hours, but in the lost ability to make certain kinds of beauty altogether. Long before the ticking of mechanical clocks marked the hours, medieval cities kept time through the mesmerizing flow of water. Water clocks, or clepsydry, weren't just primitive predecessors to gears and pendulums. They were marvels of hydraulic engineering, some so precise they could measure intervals shorter than a minute. Picture the Great Clock of Strasbourg, where a complex system of floating markers and calibrated drains not only told time but animated entire processions of figurines that delighted crowds every noon. Or consider Al-Jazari's legendary 13th century elephant clock, a towering brass masterpiece that used water to power moving scribes, ringing bells, and even a rotating celestial disc tracking zodiac signs. These weren't mere timekeepers, they were theatrical spectacles blending art, science, and civic pride into a single flowing mechanism. What makes their decline so revealing is that water clocks didn't fail, they were outpaced by cultural shifts. Mechanical clocks, though initially less accurate, offered two irresistible advantages: portability and prestige. A water clock's reliance on liquid made it fragile in cold climates where pipes might freeze, while mechanical escapements could function anywhere from drafty castle towers to merchant ships. More crucially, the rhythmic ticking of weighted gears became a status symbol. When the Duke of Burgundy installed a mechanical clock in his palace, he didn't just want to know the time, he wanted visitors to hear the steady, expensive cadence of his wealth and power echoing through the halls. The transition also reflected changing attitudes toward time itself. Water clocks, with their continuous flow, mirrored nature's cycles, the gradual emptying of a vessel like sand through an hourglass. But mechanical clocks introduced the concept of segmented, quantized time, dividing days into equal hours rather than variable seasonal ones. This mental shift was profound. It paved the way for modern work schedules, scientific experimentation, and even the notion of wasting time. A 15th-century monastery chronicle captures the moment perfectly, complaining that the new mechanical clock's harsh bell steals the gentle patience taught by water's flow. Yet traces of water clock technology lingered in surprising places. Early mechanical clocks often incorporated water-driven components for striking mechanisms, while astronomers continued using precision clepsydry for celestial observations well into the Renaissance. The real tragedy wasn't their disappearance, but the loss of their most ingenious applications. Al-Jazari's clocks, for instance, included features like adjustable flow regulators to account for shorter winter days, a sophistication mechanical clocks wouldn't match for centuries. Today, as historians reconstruct these devices from manuscript diagrams, we're reminded that progress isn't always a straight line. Sometimes the most elegant solutions get left behind simply because the world turns toward louder, flashier alternatives. Along Europe's craggy coastlines, where the sea's rhythm dictated daily life, medieval engineers built an ingenious solution to nature's ebb and flow: tide mills. These waterworks transformed the predictable surge of ocean tides into reliable grinding power, channeling seawater into basins during high tide, then releasing it through sluice gates to turn massive millstones as the tide receded. The ruins of one such mill at Woodbridge, England, still whisper of its clever design. A dam stretching nearly 200 feet across a tidal creek, its gates synchronized to capture just enough water to grind grain for hours without human intervention. Unlike river mills that could freeze in winter or run dry in summer, tide mills worked with lunar precision, 4 grinding sessions every 25 hours, as dependable as the moon itself. What makes their disappearance so revealing is that tide mills didn't fail technologically. They fell victim to globalization's first waves. As shipping networks expanded in the 14th century, coastal villages suddenly had access to cheap grain from the Baltic and Mediterranean, transported by fleets of cog ships. A ledger from 14th century Brittany spells out the economic shift. Local tide milled flour cost 3 silver pennies per bushel, while imported Polish grain sold for 2. With their economic foundation crumbling, millers abandoned the sea's rhythm for more lucrative trades like shipbuilding or salt production. The mills themselves, often built on delicate estuaries, required constant dredging to maintain water flow, a cost fewer communities could justify as trade routes redirected wealth inland. The fate of individual tide mills reads like a chronicle of changing priorities. In Portugal's Aveiro Lagoon, mills that once supplied Lisbon's bakeries were dismantled to expand salt pans for cod preservation, a booming export industry. Dutch tide mills, some with dual functions for grinding and land reclamation, survived longer but only because their drainage capabilities protected precious polders. Meanwhile, England's once thriving mill at Elling became a curiosity. By 1600, travelers noted it was kept operational, more to show the art than for needful service. This transition holds eerie parallels to modern energy debates. Tide mills were the ultimate sustainable technology, zero emission, perfectly predictable, and inseparable from their local ecology. Yet their reliance on hyper-local conditions made them vulnerable when economic systems scaled beyond regional needs. Today, as engineers revisit tidal power with modern turbines, they confront the same lesson medieval millers learned. No technology exists in a vacuum. The most elegant solution can still vanish when the tides of commerce shift direction. For centuries, the distinctive rattle of interlocking metal rings was the sound of medieval warfare, a chain-mail armor moving with its wearer like a second skin. Crafted from thousands of hand-forged iron links, each painstakingly riveted shut, a full hauberk could take a skilled armorer 6 months to complete. This wasn't just protective gear, it was a technological marvel that defended knights from slashing swords and glancing arrow strikes while allowing remarkable freedom of movement. The Bayeux Tapestry vividly captures Norman invaders in 1166 battling under the weight of their mail coats, the metal glittering like fish scales as they advanced. Yet by the 14th century, this iconic armor began disappearing from battlefields, not because it failed, but because warfare itself transformed around it. The shift began with a simple but deadly innovation, the bodkin arrowhead. Unlike broad hunting points that could deflect off chain links, these needle-like projectiles punched through mail like a nail through cloth. English longbowmen at Crecy in 1346 demonstrated this horrifying effectiveness, their arrows piercing French knights' mail with such force that chroniclers described men pinned to their horses like butterflies to a board. Simultaneously, polearms like halberds and bills emerged, weapons designed to hook and drag armored opponents to the ground where daggers could find gaps in their defenses. Mail's greatest weakness wasn't its protective qualities, but its inability to evolve against these new threats without becoming impossibly heavy. Enter plate armor, not as a sudden replacement, but as a gradual augmentation. Initially, knights simply strapped steel plates over their mail at vulnerable points, chest plates called placards, kneecaps, and eventually articulated gauntlets. A 15th century inventory from Milan's armory shows this transitional phase, listing 30 hauberks with paired breastplates. But as metallurgy advanced, smiths realized they could achieve better protection with less weight by covering the entire body in customized steel plates. The final nail in mail's coffin came with the development of hardened steel plate armor so resilient it could deflect early gunpowder weapons, something chain mail could never hope to accomplish. What's often overlooked is how this transition reflected deeper societal changes. Mail's decline coincided with the rise of professional standing armies. Unlike noble knights who could afford custom-fitted plate, common soldiers still relied on mail well into the 1600s. But as warfare became more standardized, so did armor production, a shift that favored the modular, mass-producible nature of plate components over mail's labor-intensive craftsmanship. The last gasp came from unlikely quarters, Japanese samurai who combined mail with lamellar armor in ingenious ways, and Indian warriors who wore mail shirts called zura right up to the colonial era, proving that no technology disappears uniformly across all battlefields. Today, when we see museum displays progressing from mail to plate armor, we're witnessing more than a materials shift. We're observing the relentless pressure of innovation against tradition. The rings that once saved countless lives became obsolete not through any flaw in their design, but because the art of killing simply outpaced them. Yet in their demise, they left an unexpected legacy. Modern surgical mesh, shark-resistant diving suits, and even certain types of bulletproof vests all owe their existence to medieval armorers who first envisioned protection as a flexible web of metal, proving that even abandoned technologies can find new life in unforeseen ways. Step into the nave of Chartres Cathedral at dawn, and you'll witness a spectacle that medieval artisans considered divine alchemy. Sunlight transformed into jewel-toned radiance as it passes through windows of stained glass. These weren't mere decorations, they were chemical masterpieces, with colors so vivid they've endured 8 centuries of weathering, while modern reproductions fade within decades. The secret lay in recipes so closely guarded that some vanished entirely, like the legendary blue of Saint Denis, a cobalt-hued glass that medieval texts describe as shining with the intensity of sapphires under moonlight. Modern scientists analyzing surviving samples found traces of manganese, copper, and even crushed peacock bones, ingredients that interacted with molten silica in ways we still don't fully understand. The disappearance of these formulas wasn't accidental, it was a slow erosion of specialized knowledge. Glassmakers' guilds operated like medieval patent holders, dividing production steps among members so no single artisan knew the complete process. A glazier might excel at cutting glass but have no idea how to mix the potash flux, while the chemist who formulated colors never learned the secrets of leading. This fragmentation protected trade secrets but made the knowledge vulnerable. When the Black Death wiped out master glassmakers in 1448, entire color techniques died with them. A heartbreaking account from Rowan's cathedral workshop describes apprentices desperately trying to recreate a ruby-red glass by tossing gemstones into the furnace, a futile effort that produced only cracked, cloudy failures. Shifting artistic tastes also played a role. The radiant blues and reds of Gothic windows gave way to the chiaroscuro effects of Renaissance painting, with patrons demanding cheaper enamel paints instead of labor-intensive stained glass. By the 1600s, many workshops had abandoned traditional methods altogether, repurposing ancient glass as raw material for clear windows. The final blow came from industrialization. 19th century factories mass-produced uniform glass sheets, rendering obsolete the uneven, hand-blown panes that gave medieval windows their luminous depth. Yet fragments of this lost art persist in unexpected ways. When conservators at Canterbury Cathedral discovered irreplaceable 12th century glass deteriorating, they found medieval craftsmen had anticipated this very problem. Some panels contained trace amounts of gold nanoparticles that acted as microscopic stabilizers, a nanotechnology trick centuries ahead of its time. Today, as scientists use X-ray fluorescence to reverse engineer these ancient recipes, each discovery feels like decoding a message from the past one that reminds us how easily beauty can slip through our fingers when we stop valuing the hands that make it. After the fall of Rome, Europe's legendary road network didn't vanish overnight. It faded in patches, like a tapestry slowly unraveling at the edges. But what few realize is that medieval engineers didn't just let these roads crumble. In places like 12th century France and Norman England, they actually rebuilt them with astonishing skill. Surveyors using simple wooden tripods and plumb lines laid out straightaways that would make modern highway planners envious, while masons packed crushed stone into layered foundations topped with precisely fitted slabs. The remains of one such road near Mont Saint-Michel still show the telltale camber, that slight upward curve designed to shed rainwater, a technique borrowed directly from Roman manuals. Yet by the 14th century, these ambitious projects lay in ruins, their stones pried up for castle walls or swallowed by mud. The reasons reveal a harsh truth about infrastructure. It's not the building that's hard, it's the maintenance. Medieval kings might fund road construction as vanity projects. Charlemagne famously ordered all major routes wide enough for 2 wagons to pass. But without centralized bureaucracies to oversee repairs, even the best roads deteriorated. A tax record from 1332 shows English villagers fined for failing to maintain their stretches of the old Ermine Street, not because they refused, but because years of crop failures left them unable to spare the labor. Political chaos accelerated the decline. When the Hundred Years' War fractured France into feuding territories, local lords deliberately neglected roads to hinder enemy movements. Chroniclers describe strategic road rotting, where drainage ditches were filled in to create swamps that stalled advancing armies. Ironically, some of the best-preserved medieval roads today are those that became unimportant, like the Alpine passes abandoned when trade shifted to river barges, their isolation protecting them from the plunder that befell major thoroughfares. The consequences rippled across society. Without reliable roads, wheeled carts gave way to pack animals, reducing transport efficiency by half. Towns that thrived as way stations on Roman routes withered into obscurity, while others sprang up along new, often circuitous paths. A merchant's ledger from Cologne complains of journeys taking 3 weeks instead of 10 days because the old straight road is now a goat track. This regression wasn't universal Italian city-states, and the Hanseatic League maintained impressive road networks, but it showed how fragile connectivity could be without institutions to sustain it. What makes these forgotten roads so poignant is their ghostly presence in our modern landscape. Many highways still follow medieval detours that veer wildly from the Roman originals, their crooked paths fossilizing long-vanished obstacles like fallen trees or land disputes. Next time your train or car slows on an inexplicable curve, you might be tracing the imprint of a 14th century shepherd's shortcut, a reminder that infrastructure isn't just about engineering, but the societies that choose or fail to uphold it. Buried beneath the fertile fields of medieval Europe lay an agricultural revolution so effective it could double crop yields. Yet it vanished for centuries, not because it failed, but because war and chaos made remembering impossible. The 3-field rotation system wasn't just smart farming. It was a delicate dance of soil science and communal planning. Imagine entire villages coordinating to divide their land into thirds. One section sown with winter wheat, another with spring barley or legumes, and the third left fallow to recover nutrients. This simple cycle prevented the soil exhaustion that plagued earlier 2-field systems, while nitrogen-fixing plants like peas and lentils naturally replenished the earth. Records from 9th century Frankish monasteries boast harvests so abundant they could feed growing populations and still store surplus grain against famine, a stability that fueled everything from cathedral construction to university endowments. The system's collapse reveals how fragile agricultural knowledge can be when severed from the societies that sustain it. During the 14th century's cascade of disasters, the Little Ice Age's failed harvests, the Black Death's labor shortages, and the 100 Years' War's scorched earth tactics, entire villages vanished, taking their farming rhythms with them. A tax roll from Normandy paints a haunting picture. Fields once meticulously rotated now listed as wasteland, no memory of use. Without elders to pass down planting schedules or scribes to record them, survivors reverted to desperate monocropping, stripping the soil bare in a bid for immediate survival. The consequences were catastrophic. Soil depletion deepened famines, which in turn sparked peasant revolts that further disrupted farming, a vicious cycle that took generations to break. What makes this loss especially tragic is that the knowledge wasn't truly forgotten. It was actively suppressed in places. After the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, landowners dismantled communal field systems, fearing organized village councils might again become hotbeds of rebellion. In Eastern Europe, where serfdom tightened its grip, lords imposed cash crop monocultures like rye for export, overriding traditional rotations that balanced nutrition and sustainability. A Polish serf's diary from 1520 laments being whipped for planting peas among the rye, his family's ancestral knowledge literally beaten out of him. The revival of crop rotation centuries later wasn't innovation, it was amnesia lifting. When 18th century British agriculturists discovered the Norfolk four-course rotation wheat, turnips, barley, clover, they were unknowingly recreating medieval practices with minor tweaks. Modern agronomists studying pre-Black Death soil samples have found micronutrient levels rivaling today's best organic farms, proof that these abandoned systems achieved sustainability we're still struggling to replicate. The lesson isn't just about farming, it's about how easily human societies can lose even their most vital technologies when the threads of cultural continuity snap. In an era facing climate disruption and soil degradation, those medieval fields whisper a warning: progress means nothing if we can't remember how to sustain it. Behind every abandoned invention lies a human story, not just of failure, but of choices that reveal our deepest tensions with progress. When we trace the threads connecting these 26 medieval marvels, four powerful forces emerge repeatedly as engines of obsolescence. First came the fear of disruption, where technologies threatened existing power structures. Greek fire wasn't lost because it stopped working. It vanished because Byzantine emperors understood that controlling its secret meant controlling naval supremacy. Similarly, the monastic herbal remedies that could ease suffering were condemned as witchcraft, not because they lacked efficacy, but because they empowered healers outside sanctioned institutions. This pattern echoes today in debates over decentralized technologies like cryptocurrency, reminding us that innovation is never just about capability, it's about who gets to wield it. Economic currents proved equally decisive, sweeping away inventions that couldn't navigate changing tides. The water-powered bellows that revolutionized medieval metallurgy didn't disappear due to technical flaws, but because deforestation made their operation unsustainable, a cautionary tale about resource-intensive technologies. Meanwhile, the exquisite lost wax casting technique faded not from lack of demand, but because mass production prioritized quantity over artistry. Here lies a paradox. Sometimes the most sophisticated solutions are the most vulnerable, requiring ecosystems of support that vanish when markets shift direction. The Treadwheel crane story captures this perfectly. Its superior efficiency became its downfall when guilds realized fewer workers could accomplish the same tasks. Cultural resistance formed a third barrier, often cloaked in moral or aesthetic judgments. The windmill-powered organs that once filled town squares with automated music weren't dismantled because they malfunctioned, but because authorities deemed them distractions from pious labor. Baghdad's possible batteries may have been abandoned due to religious unease with unnatural forces manipulating metals. Even the horse collar's partial retreat stemmed from cultural associations where some societies saw progress. Others saw arrogance in speeding up nature's rhythms. These cases expose how technologies don't exist in sterile labs but in living cultures that shape their acceptance. Most poignant are the inventions abandoned through sheer fragility of knowledge, not deliberately suppressed, but lost through institutional collapse or specialization. The Antikythera Mechanism's intricate gearing and Damascus steel's nanostructures required lineages of expertise that evaporated when societies fractured. Unlike the printing press, whose designs could be widely replicated, these technologies depended on tacit knowledge, the kind carried in artisans' hands rather than instruction manuals. The libraries of Timbuktu's destruction shows how easily centuries of accumulated understanding can scatter when preservation systems fail. Yet within these patterns lies a surprising counter-narrative. Sometimes abandonment was the wiser path. The Trebuchet gave way to cannons not through Luddite resistance, but because gunpowder, however primitive at first, held transformative potential. Roman concrete's disappearance may have spared medieval cities from even more reckless architectural experiments. This duality challenges our instinct to mourn all lost technologies. Progress isn't just about preserving every invention, but discerning which paths lead to flourishing. What unites these threads is their enduring relevance. When medieval farmers reverted from 3-field rotations to subsistence farming during crises, they weren't rejecting progress, they were surviving. Their choices mirror modern dilemmas about adopting renewable energy or automation while protecting vulnerable workers. The real lesson of these abandoned inventions isn't that past societies were short-sighted, but that technological evolution has always been a series of negotiations between stability and change, between individual gain and collective good, between what we can do and what we dare to sustain. The story of these 26 abandoned inventions is more than a collection of forgotten gadgets gathering dust in history's attic. It's a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal dance with progress. Each vanished marvel, from the Byzantine Empire's Greek fire to Timbuktu's plundered libraries, carries a lesson about how innovation thrives or withers in the soil of human society. Consider this: every breakthrough exists at the mercy of 3 powerful forces: fear, necessity, and the fragile threads of knowledge that bind generations. The medieval world wasn't some primitive backwater. It was a laboratory where brilliant minds grappled with the same dilemmas we face today. When the creators of Damascus steel took their forging secrets to the grave, they weren't just losing a recipe, they were severing a connection between past and future that no modern microscope has fully repaired. What makes these disappearances so haunting is how ordinary their causes often were. Not grand explosions or dramatic bans, but quiet erosion, a guild protecting its monopoly here, a war disrupting trade routes there, a generation too busy surviving to bother writing things down. The water-powered bellows that revolutionized metallurgy didn't fail because they stopped working. They vanished when the forests fueling them did, a warning about technologies tied to unsustainable resources. Meanwhile, the windmill organs that once turned breeze into music weren't dismantled by some edict, but because maintaining their delicate mechanisms became inconvenient when cheaper entertainment emerged. These inventions didn't collapse under their own weight, they slipped away while no one was looking. Yet within these losses lies a curious hope. History isn't a straight line of progress, but a spiral where old ideas often resurface in new forms. The principles behind Su Song's astronomical clock tower quietly migrated westward to inspire European horology centuries later. Modern surgeons are now studying medieval prosthetic designs for inspiration on lightweight, articulate limb replacements. Even Greek fire's mysterious chemistry finds echoes in today's debates about restricting thermobaric weapons. The past whispers to us through these fragments, reminding us that no knowledge is ever truly lost, just waiting to be rediscovered when the world catches up. As we stand in our own era of dizzying innovation, these medieval abandonments challenge us to ask uncomfortable questions. Which of our technologies might future historians puzzle over, wondering why we let them disappear? Will the meticulous craftsmanship behind silicon chip manufacturing one day seem as arcane as Damascus steel forging? Could entire fields of knowledge like cryptography or quantum computing vanish if political winds shift against them? The most sobering lesson isn't about the past, it's about recognizing how easily we could repeat its patterns, discarding breakthroughs without realizing their value until it's too late. But here's the beautiful paradox: by studying these forgotten paths, we gain something more valuable than any single invention: the wisdom to nurture progress without becoming prisoners to it. The medieval world teaches us that progress isn't just about creating new things, but about building societies resilient enough to sustain them. So the next time you marvel at some modern wonder, take a moment to imagine it centuries from now, not as a relic in a museum case, but as a living tradition, passed down and improved through generations who understood that the future isn't just something we invent, but something we choose to preserve. Your turn. Now hit that like button if this journey through time made you think differently about the gadgets in your own life, and subscribe to join us as we keep unearthing history's hidden turning points. Drop a comment below. Which abandoned invention from our own era do you think future historians will scratch their heads over? Forgotten technologies aren't just footnotes, they're signposts showing us all the roads not taken, and sometimes the ones worth revisiting.